Hello everyone, how are you? Okay, so I've got something a little bit different today. I want to talk about reasons for the successes or failures of bands or musical projects, etc, etc. This is drawn from a lot of experience, but I want to bring a bit more science into this. Because a few people have done videos on this about, like talking about like the bands or projects they've been involved in, but the actual, I don't think anybody's actually like pinned it down in quite the same way that I'm going to do. Like in terms of, say, like if you're treating like being a musician like any other business, like in terms of like procedures to follow, and I'm not saying that, like, if you follow this, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. But just to give you an overview of the usual things about like team building and why teams work and why teams fail, because of, like your band is that's going to be the most important team you've got. If you want to make it as a musician, even if you're a solo musician, I mean, there's still people involved there. Because like you need people to do your sound, you do your sound check, lighting perhaps. You need to get to places, so you've got to show up. So you've got to get your equipment there. You got to look the part as well. You need somebody to book places for you, etc, etc. But I think I should just start to now just to get to the crux of this. So all teams, they start with this, like these 4 points, these 4 stages. You may have heard them before: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Now, I mean, quite often, if you may have done like a course at work about this sort of thing, but it really does apply to like bands and musicians. So I made some points under each one. So I'm going to start with like the forming stage. Now, point number 1: people. It's important to get the right people. But who are the right people? Say you want to form a progressive metal band or something like that. Now, you may have visions of, right, well, I need John Petrucci, I need John Petrucci on guitar, and I need Mike Portnoy on drums, and but you're living in the middle of nowhere. You're living in like some town on the outskirts of wherever. It's unlikely that you're going to find a Mike Portnoy or a John Petrucci just out in the sticks somewhere. I mean, maybe it can happen. So you may need to compromise on that. You may need to think differently. So think more about in terms of like is it better to work with sort of highly accomplished musicians who are sort of really rare to find, or is it better to work with people who you're going to get on with, and they can get better, and you can all get better as the project progresses? Surely it's better to do that. It's kind of like, when you've seen some of these videos about, like dating circles, about how you got 80% of the women are chasing like sort of 20%, or even like 10% of the men. These sort of 80-90% of the women want like 6 foot men who earn like sort of $1 million a year salaries plus, or whatever, or anything less than that isn't very good, and they're all going to be very handsome and etc, etc. So it's kind of like that. So you got to think about being realistic, you know. Yes, so I say it's better to find people that you can actually get on with, so you can actually get better, you know, as a unit, rather than having these preordained ideals of what you want. Now, certainly, like, you know, you can set standards for yourself of you know, what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept, is, you know. But that's different. You know, that's not quite the same, is it? So, you know, we can all find areas, you know, like perhaps to compromise. So there's that word. And compromise isn't necessarily a weakness either. Think about that. Okay, now the next thing informing is to do with, like, actually the overall direction. Now, say you want to play like your progressive music. Now, there's quite a lot of areas, you know, you can go in, you know, in that. So, do you want to be more sort of like fusiony based, or do you want to be more sort of metal and gents and all that sort of thing based, or do you want to be more like a sort of Iron Maiden type band, or do you want to be more like Rush, or do you want to be more like early Genesis, or do you want to, you know? So you won't necessarily know that direction until your core members of the band have actually been, you know, been playing together, so you know what everybody's capable of and what people's limits are. You know, it's very important to find the limits of what people have got, or what people are happy doing. You know, that's always important. I mean, there's nothing worse than, you know, like playing in a band where you absolutely hate it. Yeah, you know, you're absolutely hating every minute of it. You're thinking, oh, I've got to do this. You know, it then ends up just being like, you know, a night of the week, or maybe even a few nights of the week where, oh, I've got to go and do that again, have I? You know, and you've got to get all your gear down there and show up, and you're starting to detest the people you're with, and so finding that direction, I think that's really important. And then that, like I say, that will only come about once you've actually played together, you know, a few times, or, you know, certainly got to know everybody, and know what people are capable of. Also, like, this is like from a production engineering point of view, this whole thing about underburden or overburden the process. So if you're forming a band and it's all about one person, you know, like the guitarist, you know, or it's his band, so, you know, you just end up being like let's just end up being like a backing band for that one person. I mean, might be the singer as well, might be the drummer, might be the bass player, might be the keyboard player, whoever. So you've got to think about, you know, why are you there? Why are you there? You know, are you there just to glorify somebody else's ego, or are you there actually as a unit? Is there more of a point you being a unit than there is just being like some stooge who's just propping somebody's ego up? You know, do you want to think about that? And also in terms of like the overburden, underburden as well, you may find that, you know, like somebody will have like a vision of what they want to do, and find that somebody's doing more of the legwork than they actually need to be doing. You know, that like, you know, like the, you know, you find that this, you know, right, well, let's go and learn this, Dream Theater song. You know, something, you know, like Erotomania or Dance of Eternity or something like that. And then you find that like one of the musicians is ended up having to do perhaps more than they're capable of doing. That's a sense of overburden. That's not enough. Meanwhile, whilst when I say like the drummers, you know, having to do all this, you know, like complicated fills and everything, the singer's perhaps just standing about, just, you know, like doing this. Well, that's an underburden. You know, that person's not being used as effectively as they could be. So you might want to think about that. You know, like some sense of balance. so that everybody's involved. Nobody's a spare part, and nobody's ego is kind of like overshadowing everybody else. And it's not about kind of, oh, hey, look at me, aren't I cool? And nobody's showing off, you know. So there's a fair bit to think on with that, and this may be something I should come back to. Some sense of focus. Now, what do I mean by focus? I mean, one already talks about direction, but the actual focus, meaning, right, well, why are we doing it? You know, I mean, personally, I mean, I've been in a few groups now where, you know, you end up, and it's not going anywhere. You know, you're going down there each week, you're either playing the same old stuff over and over again, and there's no clear focus about, well, what do we want to do? You know, do we want to be gig? Do we want to record? When do we want to record? You know, so that then starts to lead into like the next thing about like having clear objectives. You know, that like, say you're forming a group, knowing that there's a gig coming up that you could be doing, or knowing that there's some recording that could be done. It's so much better having that sense of focus. You know, those kind of objectives, rather than just plodding along for months and months at a time, where you know, like it's eating all your money up because you're paying for studio hire costs, you know, rehearsal room costs, etc., petrol on on your transport, and what else? Bus fare, train fare, you know, and so on. If you haven't actually got a clear focus about where this is going, and then even when you actually start playing as well, I mean, like, all right, you know, maybe one of like your early objectives might be, oh, well, let's go and play a gig down at the local. Right, well, where's the local? Okay, well, in Leicester, I mean, like, I'm not sure if they're still doing gigs, but like one of the big places to play would have been like the Firebook. Right, okay, well, okay, play a gig at the Firebook. Great, we've done that. Right, where else? Well, there's a place called the Shed, well, we could try there. Right, well, there's a place called the Princess Charlotte, we could try there. Right, okay, now what? Oh, we've done those. Right, so you go back to doing the Firebook again. So you end up just like not really moving on beyond those three venues, you know. No disrespect to those three venues, but and it can start to get a bit samey, a bit monotonous, you know. So these are some things to actually think about there. About, well, all right, well, once we've done, you know, once we started playing those smaller local venues, what are we doing then? Are we playing similar venues up and down the country, or are we hoping to move on to larger venues? You know, social media. You know, do we have a foothold in social media, etc., etc. So these are some things to think about. Moving on to, so those are under like the forming stage. You know, it's where you're getting your ideas together. But like the actual storming, this is where like the conflicts start to creep in. So I started out with this phrase. I mean, my brother used to say it quite a lot. It's actually a Manchester phrase. I think it originates with Piccadilly Radio, but I'm not sure. Yeah, the phrase is right tent, wrong desert. So basically, what does right tent, wrong desert mean? It means that your band could be brilliant. You could have the best ideas in the world, but unless there's any actual support for that, then it's not going to go anywhere. You know, which again comes down to, you know, that whole thing about just playing like the same 2 or 3 venues locally, or not having like a sizable social media presence. No, it's not going to go anywhere because nobody cares. You know, say you have got this brilliant progressive rock group, you know, or this brilliant fusion band. If there's no actual local market for that, you know, like this, you know, the local bands are more sort of like indie punk groups or whatever, you're going to have a terrible time actually trying to get noticed or being taken seriously, you know, because there's no real demand for what you're trying to do. Okay, so then we move on to like the next thing about adaptation. This is another sort of production engineering idea about adaptation or agility. You know, how do you adapt? You know, with like changing trends. You know, so you've got this good catalogue of songs together, but is that the best you can do? You know, the whole sort of difficult second album thing comes into that as well. You know, it's how well are you adapting? You know, as the band is progressing and growing, are you getting better as a unit, or are you just playing the same old stuff over and over again? I mean, all right, so you know, your band may have been together for 5, 10, 20 years, but if you're just playing the same old stuff, that can get a bit passé. You know, and especially if you like calling yourself a progressive band. Well, what's progressive about playing the same stuff? You know, so there's just something to think about there. The next point is what I want to say about narrative over substance. That quite often, you know, that like say you're a fan of, you know, like your favourite band, your favourite guitarist. A lot of the time, you'll sort of pick up on the actual narrative of, you know, how that person got to where they are. I mean, there's a musician that I know, you know, that you know, he dropped out of school, but he was a brilliant pianist, and because he lived in London, he actually had some contacts. So somebody said, "Oh well, I can get you in at the Guildhall, so you can study like jazz piano there." Great, right? So he studied jazz piano, and then came out, and then because he was still playing gigs, because he lived in London, because he'd come to the Guildhall, meant he could get like a good record deal. His career started to snowball. He ended up playing in sort of various names, bands, etc. And you think, wow, cool, brilliant. But it doesn't always work out like that for the rest of us. You know, if you drop out of school, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up being a famous musician. If you go to even like a prestigious college like the Guildhall, it doesn't mean you're going to become a famous musician. And also, I mean, like the days of you know, like getting like the lucrative record contract, or selling millions of records, or even like the days of like Top of the Pops. You know, that Top of the Pops. I mean, apart from like, I think they just do it at Christmas now. Maybe they do. Was it Top of the Pops 2, which is like a compilation program on like digital TV. I think that's about as far as it goes, you know. So you might want to think about that as well. It's like, you know, think about your own, you know, your own narrative, your own story, rather than trying to live up to somebody else's. You know, if you're trying to copy somebody else's pattern, it's never going to be there. It's never going to be right. You know. So think about where you've come from, and like all the things which have led to where you are and where you want to be, and then you can start to think about, you know, how much of that are you actually maybe deluding yourself, or how much of that's going to actually change, so you have got like more of a clear focus about where you want to go and what you want to do, you know, as a performer, musician, etc., songwriter, etc., etc. And then of course there's other things like life getting in the way, you know. I mean, I worked with a singer. Now, obviously, she had one of like the best reasons for leaving the group is that she had to choose between you know, the group or training to be a surgeon. So obviously, you know, I would say, well, yeah, obviously, saving lives and becoming a surgeon. I mean, that's much better than like, you know, just playing in this local band, isn't it? Also, people do get married. People have families. People have regular jobs, and it may turn out that you can perhaps make more money in your regular job than you can, you know, being a musician, or being in a band, or being in a musician. Excuse me, I'm getting my words muddled up here, but you know, those are, you know, those are some things to think about. And of course, people do grow up, and your changes, your musical, the music you're listening to, that might change as well. You might start listening to other things. I mean, I know as a friend of mine. I mean, this is going back, like sort of in the 80s. And he was in we're a heavy metal band. But then bands like the Smiths were coming along, and they were starting to get more into that. Starting to doing, that more sort of post-rock sort of alternative indie music. So you may find yourself being committed to that, but not picking up on the vibes of like the new stuff that's coming along, or things which might support you better, or what's a more natural fit for you to actually do. And then we get into this one. It's not like the record, which again kind of fits with this sort of idea of narrative. Where you're playing a song, and the band's starting to find its own sound. And then you go home and you put one of your favourite albums on, which is heavily produced, snapped to the grid, auto-tuned, etc., etc. You've probably done it like one of these really prestigious studios, like Manor Studios or whatever like that, and and it's probably got Bob Rock producing it. I mean, I don't know who this record is, but I'm sure you can imagine it. And you're thinking, oh, what we're doing is, it doesn't sound like that, does it? So then you start to like sort of second guess all the progress that you started to make. Rather than thinking about, well, no, you need to be thinking more in terms of the actual progress that we've made or is being made. Okay, so now we start to get into like the norming phase, and so kicking off with things like that. So we got regularities, things like regular rehearsals, regular gigs, regular recording, regular social media, gig blogs, band blogs, etc. Those sorts of things. You can pretty much expect those to be there, and then if they're not there, then what's wrong? Something must be wrong. Because like if the gigs aren't coming through, all right, like things like COVID, you can't predict on that. But if they're not coming through, then you need to be asking why they're not coming through. And you need to be firm about it. You need to be blunt about this as well. Okay, next is this thing about complacency. But yes, there'll be pieces in the set which you kind of expected to be doing, and there'll be certain things you're doing, like certain, but you're not pushing yourself enough. So complacency, I always think, is the worst enemy that any artist can face. Because you're not truly challenging yourself. And the only real way of getting better is to challenge yourself, and so actually the only way of succeeding is to challenge yourself as well. It comes back to that earlier point about adaptation, but I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so then we got this idea of what I call success versus fame. Well, success and fame, you might think they're the same thing. Not necessarily, because in this in this current time, we got this cult of celebrity, haven't we? That you can be famous for being famous. You can be an internet influencer. You can be, just do like a silly dance on TikTok or whatever, and suddenly you're famous. You can go on X Factor or American Idol, and suddenly you're famous. You can go on, do they still do Big Brother? You can go on reality TV. But you can certainly go on to something like X Factor, do something really atrocious. Like I'm sure you've seen quite often they'll pick out like somebody who's really terrible, and then they become famous for being really terrible. So you've got to think about that. And confuse. Don't want to confuse the idea that we've got regular gigs, we're recording. We're starting to get over social media, so some money's starting to come through. You don't want to be confusing that with, oh well, living in a big mansion, you're driving Ferraris, and you know, you're hiring a jumbo jet to go to, you know, like to do this extensive tour of America, or you know, or the world, or whatever. So, you know, you got to start coming back down to earth. You know, like, you know, no matter how famous you are, there's still, you know, there's still those core ingredients about, you know, like, you know, getting on with people, and you know, these points I've been discussing so far. But again, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Then we start to get to this thing about what's known as like flaky people, where, you know, you've had like the rehearsals have been going, the band's starting to progress now, it's starting to move forward. Suddenly somebody drops out. What are you going to do? I mean, I remember, you know, there's that. Have you seen that sort of history of Iron Maiden? I think it's like a 3 or 4 part documentary. But like in the first part, there's this bit where, you know, like somebody drops out of, you know, like one of the lineups of Iron Maiden, one of the earlier lineups, and then Steve Harris goes round to his house, and he's with this guy's with his girlfriend, and then Steve says, well, all right, well, tell me now in front of her, do you want to be in this band or not? Because if not, you're out. And then he goes, right, okay, you're out. And then of course Iron Maiden went on to be Iron Maiden. Now I'm not saying that your band will go on to have the same kind of success and longevity that Iron Maiden have had. But, you know, this thing about flakiness. Apart from, you know, apart from things like, you know, life getting in the way, you know, like obviously, you know, like if you've got family commitments or work commitments, that's one thing. But kind of like, oh, I can't be bothered. That's not gonna cut it, you know. And then following on from that as well is like the outside influence, what you call the Janine, if you're a Spinal Tap fan, or the Yoko if you're a Beatles fan. But basically, where this is where like somebody's partner or girlfriend will suddenly have an influence on the group which they shouldn't have. You know, it's kind of like, I'm not naming any names, but there was somebody in one of the groups I was in who was saying, well, I think my girlfriend should have a say on this because otherwise I'm going to be outvoted. Well, but this person's girlfriend wasn't actually in the group. I mean, but then also the other side of that is, if you're treating being in the band as your job, then how are you going to perform if you are in a band with your wife or your girlfriend, or you're attracted to somebody in the band, you know, and you end up having a relationship? How is that going to change the dynamic of things, you know? Because somewhere down the line, if it all goes pear-shaped, it's going to impact not only on you, but on your music, you know, on your art, you know. So I just want to throw that out there because, you know, these are, you know, these are some good points, you know, to ruminate over, and I don't think anybody else has really sort of looked at it in this way. And then finally, under like the performing, because this, well, it's basically like you need to review. So we're going back to step one again. You know, how well are we doing? You know, you may have played a great gig, or it went down well. But I mean, this isn't necessarily micromanaging either. But it's kind of like, could you have done better? You know, what went wrong? You know, are the timings on songs too long?